What up, Wizards? It's Dev from The Place, and last week, the impossible really did happen. Turns out it wasn't some kind of fever dream. A Slogurk deck that a lot of people would have considered D tier last week walked into a 1,200-person, $75,000 standard tournament and walked out as not only the winner, but also as the most talked about deck in Standard. Since then, it's been said by multiple pros that Standard is, quote, far from solved, and there's a buzz about the format that hasn't been around in a few years now. And it's exciting to see. It makes you want to get in there, dig under every little rock, and see what people are missing in Standard. Well, here's the good news. I've done at least some of that work for you, because I've been playing Standard the whole time, and for a while now, there's been a big batch of cards that I've been surprised aren't seeing a little bit more play. So let's hang out a little bit today and take a second, third, fourth look at some of these cards. And hey, you're new to Standard, haven't played in a while, interested in some of these big money tournaments this year, you're hearing some of this buzz, you're kind of into it, then maybe we'll introduce you to a card that you hadn't seen yet, fire up the oven, get the cooking started, whatever. So today, let's take a look at the top 10 sleepers in MKM Standard.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back. Hey, make sure you like the video, sub to the channel, do all the YouTube stuff. I know you're not going to do it right now, but YouTube tells you to do the call to action early in the video, even though it annoys everybody. So I'm just doing what they're telling me to do. You can also thank the patron of the day, by the way. It's Elise Hill this time around. Been a patron for about 3 months. I see you, Elise. You're pretty cool. Thanks for supporting the channel, and thanks for bringing everyone this video today. Thanks, Elise Hill, in the comments section down there. And of course, if you want to check out the Patreon, I got my link in the box. It's right down there. You can check it out. But either way, let's look at the best sleepers. What are in this Standard right now? Starting with the honorable mention, because I got to get this card in. Look, a lot of the cards in this video are going to be cards that I think you could build a deck around, or cards that I think could actually like end the game when you cast them, or a part of a good combo or something like that. But there's got to be room on this list somewhere for a decent sideboard card. And I think that's exactly what Fian Sensor is. Now, Fian Sensor is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/3 Phyrexian wizard. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-Phyrexian spell each turn. Non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped. Okay, so you get like a rule of law mixed with like an authority of the consoles. I was going to say Kismet, but that's probably too old school for the children, so we'll go with authority instead. Still, that's a pretty good little mix of stuff to have on one guy. There's a fair amount of aggro decks. Boris Convoke, and also every aggro deck in the format that wants to play multiple spells in a turn, so I guess this is decent against those, and okay as a blocker some of the time against some of their guys too. But there's also a number of like combo-y, like mid-range decks that look to get to like 7 or 8 mana and do something wild, and in some cases those decks will play multiple spells in a turn, like the decks that like to cast Breach the Multiverse like 8 times in a turn until you're milled out completely. That's a new one, and it's really fun, but this kind of helps to stop that a little bit. So there's multiple sideboard uses for a card like this. There's also a fair amount of haste in Standard depending on the matchup, like Imodane's Recruiter and stuff like that. You got to worry about them hitting Gleeful Demolition and then playing Recruiter and attacking for like 50. So, you know, it's really nice to have this effect out. Suddenly they just can't attack you for 1,000,000 when they didn't even have any guys out when the turn started. So pretty sweet against Mono Red and Boris Convoke and blah blah. So I kind of like the way this lines up a little bit against a few decks, but again, I probably wouldn't play it in the main, but it's worth bringing up. And that's exactly what the old honorable mentions are for, so I don't feel too bad bringing you up, buddy. You're a good dude. But let's move on to the actual list here. With number 10, let's take a look at Sea Double. A Sea Double is 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for an instant that cannot be copied. That's because you can choose one of these things, but if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their yard, you can choose both of these things. One of the modes is Copy Target Spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. That means that any spell, by the way, creature spell, planeswalker spell, whatever, any spell for 4 mana and instant speed you can copy, but you can also just create a token that's a copy of a creature if that's what you want to do instead. Or again, not the state in the United States, but or again, you could do both. Porque no los dos if your opponent has enough stuff in their yards. That's really cool. Imagining the value on that is tempting, especially against kind of that same deck we were just talking about, you know, Conspiracy Unraveler, Breach the Multiverse, Tricks. This is actually really sweet, right? You could just copy their Conspiracy Unraveler and have that for yourself, which is cool. You could also just copy that Breach the Multiverse they just tried to cast on you. Get your own Breach, get your own Unraveler. You're feeling pretty good about that, but you can also just copy a Sheldred or like whatever you want to do, you know? Having the ability to instant speed copy a creature is at like the baseline level kind of a removal spell when they swing in with that creature. You can copy it, block, whatever. most of the time that's going to work. But other times it's going to be a blowout for you to have an amazing copy of whatever they've got, especially considering you have removal spells and they don't, at least in my example. And I shouldn't have to point out, or maybe I do, again, maybe you're new to Standard, there's actually a fair amount of like 7 mana cards in Standard that people are just slinging around right now. So if you wanted to copy their like Virtue of Persistence when they finally play it, or their Atraxa, or their Atali, these are Breach the Multiverse, like these are all like huge spells that actually do see play, and they're definitely worth copying. But even if your opponent already has the Atali or the Atraxa down, again, you just copy that. You just create a token that's a copy of it and get the ETB trigger too. It's just, it's actually a pretty ridiculous card that is 4 mana, but in this Standard, I really don't think that's too much to ask. Number 9 is a card that could go pretty well in both aggro decks and like mid-range combo decks, depending on what you're trying to do. Let's take a look at Kayla's Reconstruction here. This is 3 mana, 3 white mana, and X for a sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put up to X artifact and or creature cards with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield. The rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So I love the way this scales, and you might have dreams of casting it for like 8 mana and getting all the guys or whatever, but honestly, this works for like 5 mana. It works just fine for 5 mana. You're always going to be looking at 7 cards. So if you built your deck correctly, it's basically always going to get you 2 guys. And in some cases, it's going to give you 1 mana worth of mana value if you get 2 3-mana guys for 5 mana, right? But honestly, again, the best thing about this is its ability to help put combos together like the Elasil Core, Bartolome deck, or maybe the Amalia Benavides Aguirre and Voice of the Blessed deck that also needs a ton of different creatures to be in place in order for it to do something. Speaking of Orzhov, if you're in Orzhov, and I basically always am, you can get everything from, say, Deep Cavern Bat to Gix, and those are both really good picks. You can get a Sanguine Evangelist with this. That's an awesome pick too. There's just all kinds of really good options for a card like this in Standard right now. So if you haven't really, resolved a Reconstruction in a while, give it a shot. You'd be surprised how good it feels. I really, really like Magic cards. I don't think that's any secret. I got a whole thing going on here, but there's just nothing like a good book. So let's nestle in with number 8 here. Take a look at Terens Journal. This is 2 mana, 1 on a black for a legendary artifact. You can tap it and sacrifice another artifact or creature to draw a card, but for some reason you can only do that as a sorcery. But you can also pay 2 and tap it and discard your hand to transform it into the Tomb of Aklazats. This is a legendary land which has the cave typing attached to it. You can tap it for a black mana, but the interesting part is that you can tap it, and that allows you to cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters the battlefield with a finality counter on it, excuse me, and it's a vampire in addition to its other types. In case you hadn't seen finality counters yet, that just means if the creature's going to die, you exile it. Now, it seems to me like this is a decent backup plan for Virtue of Persistence in decks that want it, and people really like Virtue of Persistence. It's not unheard of to play that card, and not only is it not unheard of, it's very heard of. In the last 48 hours of playing Arena, I've probably had 4 people resolve the 7 mana half of Virtue of Persistence against me, and I've probably resolved it a few times myself. Great card, but it costs, I don't know if you caught it there, 7 mana to cast that card, whereas this thing only costs 2 mana and 4 total mana to get it flipped over and allow you to start getting stuff out. And in the meantime, the between time there, it's a land. If you don't want to tap it to use its ability, you just tap it for mana, so it kind of ramps you a little bit. And I know you might say, Dev, you got to discard your hand to get this thing flipped over. That's ridiculous. And yeah, it's a good argument, but it's slightly weakened by the fact that this card allows you to play cards from your graveyard, so you kind of don't care that you discarded your hand. As a matter of fact, if you have other reanimation tricks in your deck, you might want to discard your hand. But if you don't want to do any of that, if you just don't want to flip the card over, that's fine. You can also just tap it and sack random little dinky tokens and stuff to it to draw cards, which is a pretty cool ability in and of itself. But again, if you did want to flip it over, it's just 2 mana to do that. That's nothing. So I actually think this card is really sweet and has been overlooked for a while. I don't think it needs to be a 4 of in any deck, but a 1 of, and a little silver bullet in there maybe does some work every now and again. I think we should be doing more of that. Anytime a card like this isn't seeing play, I'm pretty sure it's because we don't have a very good read on the format. Just wanted one more joke. But let's move to number 7. It's Twin Ferno. I don't know why I have to say it like that, but I always do. Twin Ferno is 2 mana, is 1 and a red for an instant. You can choose one of these things. I like modal spells. On mode 1, when you cast your next instant or sorcery this turn, you copy it and choose new targets for the copy if you want to. On mode 2, a creature you control gains double strike till end of turn. Both of those things are good. Turns out a fork that's stapled to a Temur Battle Rage. Card doesn't see any play. I just don't really see the card like rotting in your hand for very long. It's always got to have some kind of function, right? So long as you have a creature on the table, you can use it offensively, obviously, or even defensively. I guess you could do that. Maybe. It's a nice little ancillary, like tertiary use for the card. Are those the right words? I don't know English, but assuming you don't have a creature on the table, you can copy spells with it. And honestly, if you don't have any creatures, you don't have any spells, like what kind of a Magic player are you? What are you doing? So if you're playing Magic, if your deck plays Magic the Gathering, you'll probably find some kind of use for this card. Here we are at number 6, and I honestly want this card to be in my top 3, but I have to behave myself. Number 6 is Cosmic Rebirth. This is 3 mana, 1 a green and a white for an instant, which is pretty cool. Choose target permanent card in your graveyard. If it has mana value 3 or less, you may put it onto the battlefield. If you don't put it onto the battlefield, put it into your hand. You gain 3 life. So this is unassuming, but it actually does a lot of very powerful stuff. First of all, it just is ramp. That's probably like the bottom of the card, but I guess if you use one of those new Capenna lands or something like that, it's in your graveyard when you play this. It's ramp at instant speed. So, and it gains you life. There could be worse things, but aside from that, this actually starts to getting to do some very powerful things. I promise you, you can get back multiple planeswalkers in the format with this right now. Get back a Lily with it, which seems pretty good. You get back a Tyvar, which is maybe okay, like an Abzan Insidious Roots deck, right? Because the Cosmic Rebirth will actually trigger the roots in that pile. Seems okay with Tyvar. Or maybe Ren. You could also do Ren and Realmbreaker. Get it back with this. That's all I'm saying is there's plenty of 3 mana planeswalkers you can get back with this card and gain life in the interim. So that's not too bad. But there's also like Shigeki decks because this loops with Shigeki. It doesn't exile itself. Some spells like this do, but this does not. So you just get Shigeki back. You can put Shigeki into your hand, by the way, if you want to. The card is a May ability, so you don't have to put it on the table. You can just put Shigeki in your hand, channel it to get back the Cosmic Rebirth, use the Rebirth to get back the Shigeki, channel the Shigeki, get back the Cosmic Rebirth, and a bunch of other spells. So I always like Shigeki loops, and I'm always kind of on the lookout for them. But if you're playing like Abzan Life Gain, I guess, if you want to be doing that, a powerful trick is, there's a reason to do that. You can get back like an Amalia Benavides Aguirre with this card, add instant speed, put it straight on the table, and immediately gain 3 life, triggering Amalia. So that's pretty sweet too. But maybe the most powerful thing you can do with this, or at least off the top of my head, is temporary lockdown. If you discard temporary lockdown to some effect or another, or if your opponent, God forbid, they break your temporary lockdown, that can sometimes be a very harrowing experience. You can just get it back with the Cosmic Rebirth, and not only that, but you gain 3 life too. So it seems actually kind of decent in like a control pile that has enough permanence, right? Like, oh, by the way, before I get out of this card, I just got so much to say, but I really like this card. Like I said, I wanted it to be in my top 3 because I really like it. But you can just get back like a Gloom Shrieker at instant speed, put it straight on the table, and then put a different permanent into your hand from the Gloom Shrieker into the battlefield trigger. And gain life too. It's super good. So, there's just so much to do with this card, and I didn't even really scratch the surface. There's a lot more than that. But we have made it halfway down the list, and number 5 is a control finisher that I'm pretty sure like 80% of Magic players completely forgot existed, and the other 20% really want to make work. So this is for you, the 20%. Let's take a look at Zergo and Ojutai, because too many people have forgotten this card, and a lot of people need to be introduced for the first time to it. So this is 5 mana, 2 a blue, a red, and a white for a 4/4 legendary Orc Dragon with flying and haste, and it has hexproof as long as it entered the battlefield this turn. Whenever 1 or more dragons you control deal combat damage to a player or a battle, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of them into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. You may return one of those dragons to its owner's hand. So do you get it? It's Zergo and Ojutai, right? Like it's got the Ojutai abilities, but also Zergo's ability to pop back to your hand. Really fun card, actually, turns out to be. This basically just has hexproof every turn. Pop it back to your hand. So in the later game, when control decks have not only the 5 mana required to cast it, but the 2 mana required to keep a counter spell up, or the 3 mana required for a counter spell or removal spell, whatever, right? And once they have that much mana, then suddenly this becomes the biggest headache imaginable, because you can't really kill it with instant speed removal, and it's not around on your turn to kill with a Sunfall or some sweeper or something like that, or Planeswalker's abilities. So It's really hard to deal with this card, it turns out. Again, I'm surprised that we don't see this more as a control finisher, especially now that we have Lightning Helix in the format, and Jeskai actually looks like a pretty attractive color combination for control decks. So, again, if you're trying to build control right now, there's an awful lot of people on blue-white. There's an awful lot of people on Esper, which, you know, it does make sense. But in case you wanted to try out different color combinations, I think there's a lot to say for Jeskai, not just Helix, but this card might be a big part of it too. But speaking of big old dragons that do cool stuff when they ETB, let's look at number 4. It is Capricious Hellraiser, everyone. This is 6 mana, kind of. 3 and 3 red for a 4/4 Phyrexian dragon. Now, it costs 3 less to cast if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. It also has flying. When it enters the battlefield, exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard. Choose a non-creature, non-land card from among them and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Now, the Squirming Emergence deck that's actually kind of popular right now has just reminded us that Otherworldly Gaze is actually a really, really good card. And it turns out that 1 copy of Otherworldly Gaze could get you 2/3 of the way to casting a free spell off this, which is awesome. And not only might you get to cast that free Breach the Multiverse or One with the Multiverse or really any card with Multiverse in the name, you also get a 4/4 Flying Dragon. They probably got to deal with that plus whatever you cast. This is probably not as good as a Tally, right? But even though it requires a fair amount of setup, I actually don't think that setup is that hard in current standard. Not only do we have Otherworldly Gaze, but we have all the Surveil lands. Velagi Archaeologist is seeing a lot of play. There's tons of ways people are milling stuff into their graveyard right now. Jace can mill stuff into your own graveyard, and people are having a lot of success with self-mill piles. So, you know, I've seen people get to like 12 cards in their yard by turn 3 or 4, like fairly easily some of the time. And I'm not even sure how they're doing it, but they're doing it like 3 times a day. I come up against decks that do. So, you know, shouldn't be too hard to make Capricious Hellraiser work. But now we are actually officially in the top 3, and we'll kick it off with a Planeswalker, the only Planeswalker on the entire list. Because it turns out Planeswalkers are pretty popular. People know they exist, whatever. But one that I don't think we've tried in too long is Tamiyo, Completed Sage. Now this is 5 or 4 mana. If you want to pay 5, you can pay 2, a green, a blue, and then either a green or a blue. It's kind of a hybrid, but that's a Phyrexian green-blue hybrid. That means you can also pay 4 mana for it and 2 life. Now if you do that, it comes into play with 2 fewer loyalty counters. But either way, this is meant to be a 5 loyalty Planeswalker for 5 mana, or it could be a 3 loyalty Planeswalker for 4 mana. If you +1 it, tap up to 1 target artifact or creature. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. -X is the interesting ability. Exile target non-land permanent card with mana value X from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of that card. You can also -7 Aunt Tammy to create Tamiyo's Notebook, a legendary colorless artifact token with spells you cast. Costs 2 less to cast, and also the Notebook taps to draw a card. Now that ultimate doesn't necessarily say like you win the game on it or anything, but it's an ultimate that I've gotten to a couple of times myself, and it does feel good to draw extra cards and pay less for your spells. These are all things we want, but again, the interesting ability is that middle ability. In case you haven't seen this yet, or you've just been away for a while, or you just forgot the combo existed, you needed a refresher. 3 Blind Mice came out in Wilds of Eldraine, and if you get one into your graveyard, you can always use Tamiyo to exile it from your yard and create a token that is a copy of 3 Blind Mice. That means that when you get to Chapter 2 of 3 Blind Mice, you can just copy 3 Blind Mice, because it's a token. And then, long story short, you end up with a lot of 3 Blind Mice and a lot of mice. You just end up with tons of mice tokens over the course of just a few turns. It doesn't actually take them that long to multiply. They're like real mice. And honestly, Tamiyo has plenty of hidden use beyond just that combo. And her +1's not bad either, I promise you. Just actually a pretty slick card that we need to look at more. Now for number 2, I'm going to highlight a card that some people might actually be like, kind of mad at me for reminding people that it exists. But let's take a look at Alchemists Gambit here for number 2. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 red for a sorcery. You can cleave this for 4, 2 blue, and a red. Now, if you cleave it, you remove the words that are in brackets. Okay, so if you don't cleave it, you take an extra turn after this one. During that turn, damage can't be prevented. At the beginning of that end step, you lose the game. Exile Alchemist Gambit. But, of course, if you cleave it, you don't lose the game at the beginning of that end step. Sure, it costs 7 mana to not lose the game, but 7 mana is about how much you want to pay to win the game. And it turns out a Time Walk going to win the game a lot of the time, especially if you can cast multiple copies of them. And that's usually how people finish me off when I do play against this card, which isn't super often, but usually people go 7 mana Alchemist Gambit, 7 mana Alchemist Gambit, 3 mana Alchemist Gambit, because I'm going to kill you anyway. And it usually is fairly effective. It doesn't feel good to be on the receiving end of it. And honestly, I feel like the last 5 or so years of Standard have had plenty of this, from Nexus of Fate to the one that put all the birds in play that I don't remember the name of, probably because my mind is attempting to repress it. Go. It's Alrund's Epiphany. I actually didn't have to look that up. My mind was just like, Alrund's Epiphany, and then I woke up screaming a little bit, so yeah. So none of us really want to relive those nightmares, but I'm sure there are some sickos out there that had a lot of fun playing with those decks. So in case you didn't know this, you can still play with those decks. You still have an extra turn thing in Standard, and it's actually more effective than it looks. I'll just say that. Now for number 1, I think I got a spicy one for you. I know how much you like spicy ones, but I guess that said, spice is subjective. Whatever. Look, number 1, I am really surprised that we haven't seen more people trying to make Thundurus debut work. Now this, maybe 8 mana, but who cares? You know, it costs 6 and 2 green for a sorcery with Bargain. That means that you can sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token as you cast this spell. Look at the top 20 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 creature cards from among them. If the spell was bargained, put the revealed cards onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put the revealed cards into your hand and then shuffle. Now, back in my day, we had a little card called Tooth and Nail. That's the end of that story. Tooth and Nail was a really good card, and this kind of reminds me like slightly of Tooth and Nail, kind of. But either way, it's a great card. It's a good card. I think you could argue in some decks this could be win more, but also, this is a counterpoint. I think it's a very sophisticated counterpoint. Shut up. I think that the idea of playing not just 1 Atraxa off the top of your library, but 2 Atraxas. I know you got to sack 1, but I don't care. I'm drawing like 8 cards off those 2 Atraxas, so I'm pretty happy with the result. Same thing if I grab like 2 Italis off the top of my library. I got to sack 1, but I get to cast like 4 free spells. I get to cast a lot of free spells, and I end up with a 7/7 man. So I'm pretty happy about that. But the real fun comes when you get an Atraxa and also an Itali, and like there's a bunch of other creatures you could obviously grab with this too, and end up with like, I don't know, like 14 total mana value, like very, very easily. You could grab 2 Vein Rippers, and now if your opponent tries to remove the Vein Rippers, they just take like 8 damage for no reason. It's ridiculous. So like all I'm saying is that there are a lot of fun tricks with this card right now. And again, back to the original argument you may have tried to make, it's 8 mana, Dev. It's 8 mana. Again, there's so many cards that cost 7 mana, and the difference between 7 and 8 is something. But it's not enough for me to care. Because honestly, in a format where everyone's going to play an Atraxa, everyone's going to play an Itali, everyone's going to play a Breach the Multiverse, the best thing you can do in some cases is to also do that, but twice. And this kind of lets you do that, and it's not hard to bargain. Don't get too stuck up on bargain. First of all, if you just like ramp into it with a mana rock, just sack the mana rock. Just sack that Celestis. You're probably not going to be needing it too much anymore anyway, right? But there's plenty of tokens. Clues are all over the place in the new format. So there's lots of things you can sack to bargain, more than ever before. But everybody, that is it for now. Even though that is not even close to all the cards I wanted to bring up. This too started life as a top 25. And then I kind of had to pare it down because I'm trying to learn to edit myself. I don't even know if you guys want that, but I should probably start doing it. There's a lot of stuff that I didn't mention, though. From stuff like caves and battles, you know, there's whole categories of cards that I think people should mess around with. To stuff like Joe Real, which I didn't mention because I think the card's actually kind of bad. Everyone thinks it's bad because it is, but I still want to put it on screen so you see the card because I actually think it could be really good. But hey, I'm basically done babbling. That is Allski Kowalski. So just do all the YouTube stuff. Go down there and hit the like button. Check out that subscribe button. I heard it goes like, if you hit it now, I heard it does like a little fireworks thing, so that sounds kind of fun. Let me know. Either way, you can also check out the Patreon down there. Link in the description. It's why I can do this. I literally couldn't. I would probably actually die if I didn't have Patreon. So go down there, help support the channel. It's just $1 a month. You can vote on content. We also play some Magic and just talk about Magic and, you know, life. We just kind of hang out over there on Twitch. You can check that out too. If you're interested, go follow over there. And aside from that, I guess you can follow me on Twitter. We do the old school card of the day sometimes over there, and also musings. So yeah, do stuff if you want to. If not, I'm just glad that you made it all the way through the self-promotion bit. And of course, make sure you thank Elise Hill, patron of the day. Thanks, Elise, for bringing the video to everybody. But yeah, now I'm actually, not only is that Allsky Kowalski, but I'm pretty sure that's Itsky Lewitsky. So I am done for this one, donezo for this one zo. Yeah, I think that's the last one. Haven't used that yet. But anyway, I think I'm done, guys. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.